The wind of early autumn swept through the desolate valley, where the small wooden village rested beneath the weight of a grey sky. The year was somewhere in the late 1800s, though time moved slowly there, as if the world beyond the mountains had long forgotten its name. Crooked chimneys sent threads of smoke into the dim air, and the last leaves of the birches shivered before falling to the damp soil. Among the handful of houses scattered along the muddy path stood a small cabin, with light barely breathing through its single window. Inside, a woman sat on the floor, her newborn wrapped tightly in an old wool blanket against her chest. Her name was Mary Whitlock, a name too ordinary to belong to legend. Yet the night waiting outside would etch it forever into the whispers of the valley. She had lived in this place since birth, a quiet, hard-working soul who had lost her husband to a fever during the last winter. Since then, she had endured the solitude of grief and the cruel simplicity of survival. Her only comfort now lay in the soft warmth of the infant in her arms, the faint rhythm of his breath, fragile but persistent. She had promised him peace, even if the world had none left to give. The villagers had spoken in hushed tones that morning. Some said the sheep were found torn apart in the field. Others claimed to have seen a tall, shadowed figure prowling near the tree line the night before. The oldest among them muttered words long buried under superstition, words like lycanthrope, beast of the blood moon, curse of the mountain. But such tales were common in lonely places, where darkness arrived before supper and stayed long after dawn. Mary had dismissed them with quiet disbelief, though she could not deny the uneasy scent of iron that hung faintly in the air when the wind came from the north. By dusk, the village had sealed itself in silence. Doors were barred, shutters closed, and lanterns extinguished early. Only Mary's cabin remained awake, a dim glow from the hearth trembling over her weary face as she rocked her child. Outside, the forest leaned close, black and breathing. She felt it before she heard it, a pulse in the earth, slow and deliberate, a heaviness that settled not on her skin, but beneath it. She stood, cradling the infant, and turned toward the door. The night waited, still as death, the air thick with the smell of damp soil and pine. Then came the sound, faint but unmistakable, the crunch of weight on leaves, not the step of a man. Too slow, too heavy, too careful. Her heart began to hammer, steady but desperate, the same rhythm that once filled the cabin with laughter when her husband had returned from the fields. Now it echoed against the hollow walls like the warning of a clock running out. She set the baby in the small cradle near the hearth and moved toward the table where a rusted hunting knife lay beneath a folded cloth. The blade had belonged to her husband. She had never used it before. The scratching came next, a low drag against the wood outside the door. Then silence. Mary's breath came shallow and quick, her eyes darting to the window. The glass reflected her face, pale and trembling, but beyond it she saw nothing, only the deep, liquid dark between the trees. She waited, every muscle drawn tight. The baby stirred, a faint whimper slipping from the cradle. The noise cut through the stillness like a cry for mercy. Mary froze, The scratching stopped. Moments stretched like hours. Then, with a slow and deliberate creak, the door shuddered. Not pushed open, tested, as if something on the other side was learning the weakness of the wood. She moved silently across the floor, knife trembling in her hand, eyes fixed on the trembling latch. Another groan of pressure followed, then a deep exhale, too heavy to belong to any man. A smell flooded the room, thick, wild, and sickly sweet, like the musk of wet fur mixed with the metallic scent of blood. The cradle moved, not from the baby's motion, but from the tremor that passed through the floorboards themselves. She clutched the knife tighter, her lips parting without a sound. In that instant, something outside brushed the wall, a single slow stroke of claws dragging downward, leaving a line of splintered wood. She could not see it, but she felt it, a presence enormous, crouched, breathing, listening. Her child whimpered again, soft and pleading, unaware that the world had narrowed to a heartbeat and a blade. Mary's mind drifted for a moment to the church bell that once rang every morning. It had been silent for months now, the rope cut during a storm, never replaced. The silence had become a part of the village, and now it hung like a shroud. She wished she could hear it one last time, if only to drown out the sound of her own pulse. The door frame creaked once more. She pressed her back against the wall, raising the knife, eyes fixed on the entrance. The flame of the hearth flickered weakly, its light shrinking as if the air itself was being devoured by the dark. Then it came, a flash of motion at the window, a shadow, impossibly tall, gliding past the glass with deliberate slowness. She saw the outline of a snout, elongated, steaming in the cold. The reflection of its eyes caught the firelight, a pair of burning embers moving with terrible intelligence. Mary did not move. The creature stopped outside, its breathing audible now, deep, rhythmic, wet. The kind of sound that felt like it was being drawn from the soil itself. Then silence again. She turned to her baby, whose face had relaxed back into the peace of sleep. The innocence of that stillness broke her. She moved quickly, gathering blankets and placing the infant into a small basket. If the creature came through, she would need to run. Not far, just to the root cellar beneath the floor. It wasn't safe, but it was shelter. She slid the wooden panel aside with trembling hands, revealing the narrow stairs descending into shadow. Then she heard it again, a scrape, louder this time. The door frame split slightly under pressure, wood groaned like bone. The creature was testing her resolve. Mary's breath left her chest in shallow bursts. The air had turned colder, heavy with the scent of rot and soil. She knew she could not fight what was outside. Whatever it was, it belonged to the dark, to something older than fear. But she could protect her child. That she would die for. She whispered a promise to the sleeping infant, though no words passed her lips. Then, with one trembling motion, she took a burning log from the hearth and held it like a torch. The knife in her other hand gleamed weakly in the firelight. Outside, the silence broke. By a single blow shattered the door from its hinges. Splinters exploded across the room. The log fell, scattering embers across the floor. Through the smoke and flame, she saw it, the shape that had haunted the villagers' whispers. Towering, lean fur, glistening like oil under the firelight, its limbs long and jointed wrong, its chest rising and falling with monstrous rhythm. Its eyes burned a deep feral red. It ducked beneath the broken door frame and stepped inside, slow and deliberate, every movement drenched in cruel certainty. Mary did not scream. She moved back, every instinct telling her to run. But her legs obeyed only the need to protect. The creature's gaze fixed on the cradle, the small shape within it stirring at the change in light. It took a step forward, its claws sinking into the wood of the floor with a sound like knives splitting bark. The air thickened with the smell of wet fur and decay. The baby cried softly now, unaware that death had entered the room. Mary struck first. She swung the burning log toward the creature's face. It recoiled, a flash of movement too fast for sight. The log flew from her grasp, striking the wall and scattering sparks. In that moment she drove the knife upward, cutting deep into fur and muscle. A sound followed, low, guttural, but not a roar. It was a breath of rage, an ancient exhalation that carried centuries of hunger. The beast staggered, its clawed hand swiping through the air, striking her shoulder. She hit the floor, pain flaring like fire through her chest, but she did not stop. She rolled toward the cradle, reaching for the basket that held her child. The creature turned, its movement unnatural, its spine arching in ways that defied anatomy. Its wound oozed black blood that hissed as it touched the floor. It advanced again, slower now, cautious. Mary crawled backward, dragging the basket toward the cellar door. The creature followed, silent and steady, eyes fixed on the faint motion of the blanket. It did not care for the knife still clutched in her hand, only for the life she carried. It had come not for her, but for the child. As she reached the cellar entrance, the floor beneath her creaked. The beast lunged a blur of black and sinew, but she fell backward through the opening, clutching the basket as she tumbled down the stairs. The door above slammed shut under the creature's weight. Darkness swallowed her, thick and absolute. She could hear it above claws, scraping against the boards. Heavy breaths, pacing, waiting. She pressed herself against the cold stone wall, trembling, her heart beating so violently she feared the sound would betray her. The baby stirred, but did not cry. The cellar smelled of earth, damp and iron. She waited. The cellar was nothing more than a pit carved into the ground, its walls made of damp stone, and the ceiling low enough that Mary had to crouch to move. The air felt colder there, ancient and still, as though it had not been disturbed for decades. She clutched her child close to her chest, the warmth of his body, the only proof that the world above still existed. The faint rhythm of his breathing steadied her trembling hands, though each sound from above tore at her nerves. The creature's weight pressed against the boards overhead, slow and deliberate. It knew she was there. It knew she could not leave. Time lost its meaning. Minutes dragged like hours. The smell of smoke and blood drifted down from the cabin above. mixing with the damp rot of the cellar. Somewhere in the darkness, water dripped from the ceiling, one drop at a time, echoing like a heartbeat. Mary's mind wandered through the fragments of her life, her husband's laughter in the summer fields, the songs her mother had sung by the fire, the promise she had whispered to the child she now held. All of them seemed distant, fading beneath the weight of survival. The world had narrowed to a single purpose: endure. Then came the sound, faint but distinct, a slow scrape against the cellar door. The creature had found the entrance. The air grew thick, almost suffocating. Dust fell from the ceiling as claws pried at the edges of the wooden hatch. Mary's eyes darted to the corners of the cellar, searching desperately for anything she could use. Her hand brushed against something metallic, a small oil lantern, long forgotten and half buried in dirt. She fumbled with it, her fingers slick with sweat, until she found the cold ring of flint beside it. With trembling effort, she struck a spark. Once, twice, then flame. A faint, fragile light bloomed within the cellar, pushing the darkness back just far enough for her to see. The creature's claws tore through the first layer of wood above her, sending splinters raining down. Its strength was monstrous, its patience infinite. She could see its shadow through the cracks, long, distorted, shifting as it tested the barrier between them. The lantern flame flickered, painting the walls with trembling gold. In that unsteady glow, something caught her eye, an old barrel near the far wall, its lid half open. She moved toward it, the floor cold beneath her bare feet, and lifted the cover. Inside was a pool of liquid dark as ink. She dipped her fingers in and recognized the sharp, acrid scent immediately. Kerosene, her husband, had used it for the lamps before his death. Now, it might be the only thing that could turn the night in her favor. She set the lantern beside the barrel and reached for a broken piece of wood on the floor. It would serve as a makeshift torch. Her hands worked quickly, every motion driven by instinct. Above, the scraping grew louder, more desperate. The creature had torn through half the hatch. She could see its claws now, black, glistening, each as long as her finger. She soaked the wood in kerosene and raised it to the lantern's flame. Fire leaped to life, consuming the tip with a hiss. The heat brushed her face, sharp and immediate. She took a breath and looked upward, where the ceiling trembled under the creature's weight. The hatch splintered open with a violent crack. Dust and wood rained down as the beast forced its way through. Its head appeared first, elongated, covered in dark, matted fur. Its eyes burned with hunger and hatred, fixed on the faint light below. The rest of its body followed, twisting unnaturally as it dropped into the cellar. The ground shook under its weight. Mary stepped back, the burning torch shaking in her grasp. The creature loomed above her, tall enough that its head brushed the ceiling. It moved with terrible grace, every motion deliberate, every breath a low vibration in the air. For a moment they stared at one another, woman and monster, life and death reflected in the flicker of firelight. Then it lunged. Mary ducked beneath its first swipe, the claws slicing the air where her head had been. She swung the torch upward, striking its arm. The flame caught the fur immediately, spreading faster than she had dared hope. The beast recoiled, a hiss of rage escaping its throat, and slammed its arm against the wall to extinguish the fire. The impact shook the stones, sending debris cascading around them. Mary stumbled backward, clutching her child close with one arm and the torch with the other. She could see the beast's eyes through the haze of smoke, furious, burning brighter now, reflecting both hunger and pain. It advanced again, limping slightly, its burned arm hanging at an unnatural angle. She retreated toward the barrel, her mind racing. There was only one chance. She dipped the torch into the kerosene, letting the fire flare into a violent bloom. The smell filled the cellar, thick and choking. The creature paused, sensing the shift. Its nostrils flared as it realized the danger, but it was too late. Mary hurled the torch. The moment it struck the barrel, the world erupted. Fire roared outward, swallowing the darkness in a wave of heat and light. The explosion tore through the cellar, filling it with blinding flame. The creature shrieked, not the howl of an animal, but the death cry of something older and far more terrible. It thrashed wildly, its fur igniting, its claws tearing at the stone walls in vain. Mary threw herself over her child, shielding him as the inferno consumed the space. The air filled with the stench of burning flesh and smoke, so thick it choked the breath from her lungs. She crawled toward the stairs, her body trembling, her skin seared by the heat. The hatch above had collapsed under the force of the blast, leaving an opening to the night air. Through it she could see the faint glow of the moon, pale and distant, hidden behind clouds. With one final surge of strength, she climbed, clutching the basket to her chest. Her legs screamed with pain, but she did not stop until she felt the cold breath of the outside wind against her face. She emerged into the ruins of her cabin, flames licking at the walls, smoke pouring into the sky. Behind her, the beast howled once more, a sound torn between fury and despair, before the flames consumed it entirely. Then came silence. The night had died with it. Mary collapsed to her knees in the dirt, coughing, her lungs aching from smoke. She looked down at the child in her arms. He was crying now, not in fear, but in life. The sound was thin but steady, cutting through the stillness like dawn breaking through fog. She held him close, whispering words that never reached her lips. Her tears fell freely, mixing with the ash on her face. Around her, the forest watched in silence, the wind carrying the scent of burnt wood and finality. When morning came, the village found her sitting before the ruins of her home, the infant asleep against her chest. Her hair was singed, her dress torn, but her eyes held a strange calm, the calm of someone who had looked directly into the abyss and survived. No one asked what had happened. They could see the truth in the scorched earth, in the claw marks burned into the ground, in the silence that had replaced the endless howling of the night. The villagers rebuilt her home in the weeks that followed, though she never again lit a fire inside it. She lived quietly, tending to her child and to the small patch of land that had survived the blaze. Some nights, when the wind came down from the mountains, it carried faint echoes, not of howls, but of whispers, like the forest remembering. And though fear still lingered in the hearts of the villagers, it never returned to her door. Whatever had come from the darkness had found its end there. Years later, when her son was old enough to walk, he would ask her why she never feared the woods as others did. Mary would only smile, her eyes distant, her hand resting on his small shoulder. The truth lived only in her memory. The night when she had stood alone against the hunger of the unknown, armed with nothing but courage and the will to protect what was hers. The night when the curse that haunted the valley had met its end in fire. And though no song was ever written, and no tale was told beyond the whisper of wind through trees, the villagers came to call her by a name that outlived them all. They called her the Mother of the Moonless Night.